One question I see a lot is how much story is the right amount of story for any given video game. And I think this misunderstands what story is in a video game. To me, story is simply a framing device. It adds context and power and meaning to the experiences of the player. I don't really see a big difference between the story of something like Phoenix Wright and the story of something like Space Invaders. Sure, Space Invaders has no dialogue or characters or plot, but it still has a framing device to add context to what you're doing. If the Space Invaders ships were pieces of broccoli and they were stuck at the top of the screen, you'd have a completely different game. There's always a framing device to give meaning to your play, to your experiences in general. And I think that the line between that and story is so blurry that there really isn't one. An easy analogy to make is to think of your video games as theme park rides. The reason this analogy is so useful is because theme park rides have carts. In every theme park ride, the riders are stuck inside of some kind of safe vehicle. You're the same way when you're playing a video game. You're stuck at your chair, looking at a screen, holding a controller or a keyboard and mouse, and you're doing stuff in that chair. And it's the same way as riding a theme park ride. Now, when I say theme park ride, you probably think roller coaster, but there are a million kinds of theme park rides, and in every single kind of ride, the cart and the people in the cart do different things. Maybe it's a log flume, maybe it's bumper cars, maybe it's teacups. There are so many different kinds of theme park rides, and they all have different affordances. For example, there's this ride where it's this tall spire, and you've got these little planes that just spin around and around and around the spire, and you have this little yoke, and you pull on it to go up and down. In teacups, you might spin it to go around and around. Or maybe you've got a long adventure where you're taking AR pictures of Pikachu. Maybe you're doing some kind of fancy laser tag style thing and scoring points by shooting at things on walls. The different kinds of experiences you can have while on a theme park ride are part of the joy of theme park rides. Sure, some theme park rides don't let you do much, but the same is true with games. Some games don't let you do much. So when you think about it this way, all of the mechanical interactions that you can have with your game are the cart. You're sitting inside of a vehicle that's transporting you around in this game, and it's the same thing whether it's a theme park cart or your seat at home. Can you see? That's because the cart lets you see. Can you walk around? That's because the cart lets you walk around. Can you shoot a gun? Can you click on a menu item? Those are all things the cart lets you do. But if the cart just sits there, it doesn't matter how interesting the things you can do are, it's not a ride. You have to go somewhere for it to be a ride. And sure, maybe you're just going around in circles, but you're going. And this is where the framing device comes into play. The framing device is the rails that you take. Or if you're not on rails, it's the route you take, whatever, right? The point is that there is a path that this cart goes down, and that is fundamentally some kind of framing device. Now, some are going to be really exotic and have curly cues and upside-down spirals and all sorts of stuff, but most theme park rides aren't there to try and push you to your physical limits. They're there to entertain you. So the rails are likely to be a lot more sedate. And the focus in these kinds of rides would be on, tone and mood. And there's a skull, oh no, and you're going into a pitch black cave, ooh, and then there's someone laughing at you, and here's a giant squid. Or, if you're simple, if the theme park ride is simple, it could just be something like you're going around on these little airplanes spinning around this little top, but going up and down, pulling on the yoke to raise and lower yourself, is still a big part of the joy. You look down at the surroundings and you see how high you are, and you can control that height, and that is, at least for children, quite a fun experience, even though you're just going around in circles. Whatever sort of experience you're giving to the player, you're going to have some kind of framing device to give your mechanical interactions meaning. Whether those mechanical interactions are just holding on for dear life or something extremely complicated, either way, you have a framing device. Now, I don't really think of a story as fundamentally different from other kinds of framing devices, and I don't think anybody should. A story is simply one particular way of employing the same framing devices. How do things look? How do things feel? What's the scenario? Do you have characters? Do they have dialogue? These are all questions you can ask, and the answers can be anything. You can have games with no characters but lots of dialogue. You can have games with characters and no dialogue. You can have anything you want, because the point is to use these techniques to sell the experience, not to try and have the right story. The right story is whatever sells the experience. Now, to give you a more concrete example, let's talk about Mass Effect 3. Everybody remembers Mass Effect 3, at least in proxy. You might remember that the ending of Mass Effect 3 was a cataclysmic disappointment, and sure, a lot of people have said that the blowback was exaggerated or overblown, and that's true, but it was also rooted in something very real. That was a terrible ending. Which color do you want the end of the universe to be? Nobody cared, right? So does that mean that the story of Mass Effect 3 was bad? Well, it certainly means that that particular option was bad. That particular setup was bad. That particular framing device was bad. But not too far before that, you had this big adventure where you get to choose which of your party members does which kind of task, and it's, people's lives are on the line, and that felt really good. So why would they have one part of their story, their framing device, that feels great, and then another part that feels completely terrible? You'd think that they would have the same sort of, skill level in both cases, right? Why would one be so bad and one be so good? Well, one of the main reasons is because where you're going on the track is not up for debate, but what you're doing while you're in the car is. There's no theme park ride where the rails split and go two different ways, because that would be incredibly wasteful. You would have to build an enormous amount of extra rail, you would have to build twice as many scenery elements to go through. No, when you're building a theme park ride, you know where your rails are going to go, because that is the best way you can lay them out for this theme park ride. Given the amount of space you have in your budget, this is the best set of rails you can create. But for the people in the cart, you want to give them enough freedom to explore what sort of options they might want to take. So maybe they can, accelerate or slow down by grabbing a yoke. That's a choice they can make, and it has meaning to them. It changes their adventure. So when we look back at Mass Effect 3, we can see that the end of the universe is a huge arc. That is the main arc story of Mass Effect 3. That's where everything is going. There is one set of rails running through Mass Effect 3, and it's leading to that ending. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for you to try and build 3 sets of rails going through that same ending. You build one set of rails as best as you can. On the other hand, who you choose to be friends with, well, that's you. You can make that choice, and it's not going to change the fate of the universe, and the story is going to be good regardless of who you choose to be friends with. So that's something that happens to you in the cart. You make that choice. It's personal and it's meaningful to you, but there's no right option. There's no ideal friendship. So when you're tasked with choosing which of your friends you're going to risk in order to save the world, or the universe, that's meaningful to you. It doesn't have to be on rails. The game becomes more meaningful when you let the player choose those things because it's happening inside the cart. You've brought it inside the cart. This is why we had that fling with user choice. We had that fling where, oh, look at how many branching pathways we've got. You can choose whether to be good and evil. We had about a decade of that, and then it died down. And it died down because everybody was trying to build these rides where there are 2 sets of rails, and we were supposed to believe that both sets of rails were equally cool. And that's just not how the overarching structure goes. But that doesn't mean player choice is bad. That means you give the player the option inside the cart. You can tell the player, do you want to look left? Do you want to look right? How fast do you want to go? Do you want to shoot a gun here? But that doesn't change where the rails go. It might change how fast they go down the rails or whether they're upside down, but they're still going to go down the rails because those rails were built as good as you could build them. They are as strong and as impressive as you could make them. It's very rarely useful to have two sets of rails, but it's extremely useful to give the players something to do in the cart, whether that's just looking left and right, or whether it's something extremely complicated. If you give them a little bit of freedom inside the cart, they can absorb the ride more personally. They can feel it more on their own level. And that's why I like to think of video games as theme park rides sometimes. Hope this was helpful.